Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping things to cover. So first, the event will be recorded, as you can tell, but none of you will appear on camera or audio. Only our amazing panelists will be recorded. We will share the video on the Roblox Level Up YouTube channel when it's ready, so keep an eye out for it there. We will make that announcement on Twitter and also on our Guilded server, so join our Guilded server if you have not. For our Q&A, you'll be able to submit questions throughout the roundtable discussion using a site called Slido. We'll drop the link in the Zoom chat. I think Allie has done that a few times already. Please do not use Zoom chat to submit your questions. Make sure you put them in Slido. We ask that you do that because Slido allows you to ask questions anonymously and also to upvote each other's questions so that the best ones are asked first. So if you see a question that you're interested in, please make sure to upvote it to ensure that it gets asked in the limited time that we will have available. And finally, we will stop recording after the final Q&A and start up our Guilded after party so we can hang out and chat with each other just for fun. So we hope that you will all join us there as well. Okay, I think we are ready for the real intro now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest Level Up Roundtable, Mobile UI UX for Roblox Experiences. I'm Erin, also known as Breakfast Candy, and today we'll be joined by two expert developers and Roblox's own Dan, aka DStav. Dan, take it away.
Thank you, Erin, and welcome everybody again. It's great to have you all here for this highly requested topic of mobile UI UX. Probably, in my opinion, one of the most difficult things to sort of tackle and master in game development. So I'm very excited to be joined by these two very talented developers today. First, introducing Cindering. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us. How about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Cindering. I'm lead developer of Cinder Studio, creators of Roblox High School 2 and Super Striker League.
Yeah. How long have you been on the platform? You're like one of the ancient old ones.
I've been here since 2009. I've been doing scripting ever since then.
Yeah. Awesome. What is like your favorite thing about Roblox? What keeps you around?
Just being able to like make anything you want and share it with everyone so quickly around the world. Like it's awesome to be able to do that.
Yeah. I'm assuming when you started development in 2009, you were like a UI UX prodigy. Is that correct? It's kind of like
absolutely.
You play a piano and you just know how to play. Yeah.
Total natural at
it. Well, awesome. I think we have a trailer here to show off some of your games for those living under a rock. Erin, do we have a Roblox High School 2 trailer that we can show? Cindering, how long has this game been in development for?
Well, it all started with the original Roblox High School in 2014, and then we released Roblox High School 2 in 2018. And this most recent update of ours, the graduation update, we released in 2021. So we've been at it for a long time.
Yeah. Is there any 3 on the way anytime in the future? Or are you guys just rocking on 2 into the sunset?
Yeah, I think we're gonna keep going with 2 and then see where the road takes us.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us and congratulations on all of your success up to this point.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Shifting over, UndoneBuilder, aka Nathan, joining us today from Simple Games. Welcome, Nathan. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Thank you. Quite fine indeed.
Awesome. How about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Nathan. I'm CEO of Simple Games. We've made, I think we just had our 20th game on Roblox so far now. I haven't been on Roblox quite as long as Cindering, since 2012, so I love it here.
Awesome. What's your role at Simple Games?
Mainly game designer and builder. I'm the one who just tries to make the games fun, basically, and everything that entails.
Yeah. I know when you were an accelerator and applying accelerator, you were always the one with the fancy trailer introducing your game and stuff. So I see that's like translated over to the quality of the games and the really cool UI UX that you've put together.
I'll take that as high flattery from you of all people. Thank you.
Of course. All right. What's one interesting fact about Roblox that you've learned across the years?
That's a hard one, but I'd probably say just it's so unique here that it doesn't work if it works elsewhere, and it works here. If it works here, it doesn't work elsewhere. It's almost baffling, the night and day difference of every aspect of Roblox compared to even the video games industry outside of here.
Yeah. I always joke that it's sort of like the Australia of the game industry. It's grown up in this beautiful and unique way. We're way better because we got like the platypuses and stuff over here.
We
on
definitely
Roblox.
have the
Or a
platypus.
way cooler animal, than just like a beaver or something. So, all right, let's move on. We got a lot to cover today. We got a lot of really cool stuff to show the audience. So I'm going to hop in and we're going to talk about some mobile UI, UX practices. Nathan, because I'm already talking to you, let's start with you. And here's a softball question since I really jammed you up there. Why should people care about UI and UX? What's the importance of it?
I mean, what can't be overstated about the importance of it? It's almost more important than a tutorial in your game. It's what teaches your player how to use your game, how to interact with it, and what's important in it. Especially user interface is the most important part of that, where you're telling them what's so important about your game that you're putting it on their screen permanently. I mean, obviously the mobile aspect to that is also incredibly important, given on this platform, it's probably, if you're optimizing decently, 70-80% of your players will be on mobile, but it's everything. It's more important than even your first time user experience. Don't crucify me.
Yeah. And it's great that we're talking specifically about mobile UI, UX, because while it is extremely important on PC, on console and everything, right? Your entire control scheme is UI and UX on mobile, right? So it's like really important to sort of nail that down.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's all your players too, if you're doing it half right.
That's right. All right. So for hopping into it, like what are some of the goals that a developer should strive for a good UI and UX?
I'd say there's two. And I know Cindering is going to go a lot more into detail about these, but I'd say probably the first most important thing is that players understand what's important, because there's just so much that can be going on in your game, and you are telling them, hey, this is so important that I'm putting it on your screen. I have found that in this case, pretty much always less is more. That the fewer UI you are presenting to them at any given time, I mean, for so many reasons, but scaling and just communication is as little as possible. I think I have an image for this, but in my most popular game, War Simulator, we took as many things out of the user interface as possible and put them in the physical world. So like if you want to buy something, if you want to go somewhere, or like get a quest, it's in the physical world you go to do that. The actual game only has two user interfaces that's presented to the player: how much money they have and how to buy stuff from us. Everything else is all in the world itself. The second most important part, which I know Cindering is going to talk a lot more about, is making it easy to implement. Because one of the biggest blockers, while it doesn't become apparent at first, is maintaining and creating more of your user interface. I know the thing I started with, and I know that a lot of people started with, was tried to make a UI for computers and made a UI for mobile. And that is not maintainable for so many reasons. What you absolutely should do is make a universal UI that works for all devices and that automatically scales. So this is the design that I've kind of adapted over the years of where you should be placing your eye and what your UI and what goes where. Because if you design it according to these rough principles, it can work on any screen. Most importantly, mobile, obviously, but on pretty much every screen. And that will make your life so much easier. I've met some developers who have as many as 7 different scaled UIs that they toggle with screen size. I don't know how they do it, but don't do that. Don't do that. This will make your life just so much easier. And that philosophy roughly goes throughout your UX as well. For example, another one I've worked on is when making a placement system. It was tricky. I've got another GIF for it, but designing it in a way that it works on every device. So for example, you can see here, no matter the device you're on, functionally, you're interacting with the item in the same way. So when we make an update to our system, as you're gonna do, we only have to change one thing. Now, there are some niche examples where you need to change a very specific thing, like my next example where, we wanted to make a crafting system and to display the resources, on computer, you can hover over something, but you can't on mobile, so you tap it. But even that, it's still the same user interface with just a small little change to work on mobile. And just a universal UI, I can't hype up enough as like one of the best things you'll do for yourself as a developer.
Yeah. And when you're designing these UIs, right? Obviously, a lot of this, if I hop into other games, there's a lot of conventions there. Like what can we talk a little bit about sort of leveraging what players already know or sort of trying to work towards common practices that you see? Maybe just high level.
You want to take this one, Cinder?
Yeah, all right. So yeah, conventions and expectations. Wait, I thought we were gonna. I think first, should talk about like kind of how you would implement these sorts of goals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we could go there first. I guess that does transition better into it is, Cindering, for you, like how might you go about implementing these goals? Because you could see there with Nathan's examples, there's a lot of moving parts. So like what are the steps towards implementing those goals?
Yeah, so the first basic step is sizing your UI correctly. And so, yeah, how you do that, how you size your UI. So this is your size value. And basically what this is, it's two pairs of numbers. The first pair is the X values, the second pair is the Y values. And the first number in each pair is the scale value. And that is the percentage of the parent size that this object should take up. So in this example, the X scale is 0.6, so it would take up 60% of the X size of its parent. And then the second number in the pair is your offset. So that's how many raw pixels you're adding to the size. So the way I like to think about it is scale is good for accommodating for larger screens, and offset is good for accommodating for smaller screens because you can add size to make sure it takes up enough of a smaller screen, so it's always legible.
Okay.
Yeah, and then so that's how you size UI. And then, but how do you make sure your UI stay the same shape across all screens? Because you have phones, you have tablet screens, you have PC screens. So this is where UI constraints come into play. So one notable constraint that's very useful is called UI aspect ratio constraints. And this lets you make sure your UI stays the same shape no matter how stretched out the screen is. So in the first example, this is without an aspect ratio. It'll just stretch to fill the whole space. In the second example, let's say we want it to always be a square. We add the aspect ratio and it'll always keep that shape. And this is a very useful tool for making sure that your UI keeps the same form factor across all screens. And then next you can show an example. So this is without an aspect ratio. You'll see that it just stretches to fill the entire screen, but it gets very distorted because it's not keeping the same shape. But in the next example, you have the aspect ratio. So when the screen dimensions change, it will always keep the same form factor. So this allows you to design one UI, and you can be absolutely sure that it will always fit in the screen and have the form factor that you expect for it. So next, so how do you specifically design for mobile? Well, you want to use the device emulator in Studio. Yeah, so you just toggle this on, and you can see in Studio what your UI will look like on mobile. And you can change the device, you can change the phone, tablet, PC, etc. So this gives you an accurate view of what it will look like on mobile. So when you're using this, you want to consider two main things, which on the next slide is one is your text legible on smaller screens. You want your text to be large enough so that on a smaller screen, it stays easy to read. And two, are your buttons easy to press? Because on mobile, obviously using your finger to touch the screen is less precise. So your buttons need to be big enough to where it's easy enough to press that. So these are the two main things to look for when you're designing for mobile in particular. And beyond that, there's lots of other UI constraints that are available, such as on the next slide. For example, so UI constraints, there are lots of constraints with many different functions, and these help basically automate certain aspects of sizing and positioning in your UIs. For example, you can set up a grid layout, and this just automatically places your objects in a grid. You don't have to think about it. You just set the grid size, and it does it for you. Same deal with a UI list layout. And there's other constraints too, like UI scale, UI size constraints, which really help you with scaling your UIs for different screen sizes. So these are some of the main tools they would use to actually implement UIs that scale for all devices.
Wow. Well, there you go. Cindering just gave you all the answers, so you guys can go now. That was awesome.
Yeah, that's more of like mechanical explanation of how you will do like all the things that we're going to talk about. Yeah, so once you get into like the design aspects of it, then you can use all these tools to accomplish your goals.
Yeah. Well, Cindering, I have to ask, we are focused on mobile UI UX today, but what would you say are some of the differences between, mobile UI UX and PC?
Yeah, I'd say the main difference is obviously you have a smaller screen. So say you have UI on PC, you might have the temptation to like try and cram a lot of information in there. But on mobile, you have to be considerate of the fact that you can't fit as much of that on the screen. So you have to downsize, you have to minimize the amount of info that's displayed. So that's one important thing, is considering the screen size.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, on PC, you don't want it to look like a spaceship console either, as Nathan was talking about. So in a way, it kind of benefits you that you have to develop for mobile as well, because it kind of helps constrain you on PC and keep it nice and simple.
Yeah, helps with both worlds.
Yeah. What about like audience and player needs? Like what are some of the differences there for like mobile and PC?
Yeah, so yeah, on mobile, your players are generally looking for like quicker experiences, and they might skew younger. So you want to make sure that you're offering a simple enough experience where they can jump in, find what they need, and do what they want in a shorter period of time. There's as little friction as possible.
And, given that it's a younger audience on mobile, how does that translate to UI and UX design? Like, are there differences there versus if you were designing for an older audience?
Yeah, overall, it translates into, you want to reduce the complexity, like wherever possible. Make everything straightforward, make everything obvious and clear. You don't want players to struggle finding what they're looking for. You want to just be, the most important stuff is right there for them. Now,
I've seen my friend's kid basically spider claw their way through a game masterfully, like a first-person shooter, like they were on PC. But like, what are some of the interface differences between the two that you also have to consider?
Yeah, so I have an example from our other game, Super Strike League. Um, so yeah, these are the main controls for Super Strike League,
Mhm.
and you'll notice it's very simple, and also it goes back to Nathan's point about he showed the hot zones for where you should put your buttons. So obviously the player's thumbs will be in the lower corners, so that's where you want to put your main actions, and you want to have as few controls on the screen as possible. So you notice that you don't just want to display every action at once. You want to have it be context sensitive. So only
Mhm.
display what you need at that time. Um, and yeah, simplicity is the key, really. Like have it be very straightforward, because since they're all using two fingers, unless they're doing some crazy grip sort of thing,
Yeah.
um, they're not going to be able to do like two actions at once. So that's another very important thing to consider when designing your controls.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, that's really cool. Sometimes I see on games they have the little controller on the bottom left there, but you're saying just clear out as much space as possible, let them focus on the experience and present the information when they need to know it, right?
Yeah.
I would say
Well,
that
Nathan, I
applies to
wanted
any
to toss,
platform even.
sorry, I talked over you. What were you saying, Nathan?
Just that your final point there applies to any platform, not even just mobile. As little information on the screen as possible is always a good thing. As little
Yeah.
as you can get away with.
As little as you can get away with, right? Because there is information that they need to know. Yeah. Well, Nathan, for you, is there any feature in particular that you're very proud of, related to UI UX? Maybe there was like a big challenge or it's difficult and you overcame it, and like the epiphany that you had in sort of solving that problem.
I'd say probably I'm a bit weird, and probably the most recent thing I work on is always the thing I'm most proud of, and all my older work is despicable to me. But probably
So
that
good.
inventory system that I showed earlier is the one I'm currently most proud of, trying to keep a general universal UI, but also adapt it to the nuances of the device. Quite happy with that. It's
Mhm.
an ever-going challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on the topic of things that you're embarrassed about in the past, have you ever released a feature and then gone back and made improvements to it? Like, the first time through, you're like, this is perfect. And then like a month later, you're like, "Oh, I got to completely overhaul this."
I've got features I'm still trying to overhaul. I think one of the biggest ones that I still have not gotten right are vehicle controls. And I think I showed a picture of my current running version. Uh, I've redesigned this probably 6 or 7 times now, trying to figure out how to best control a vehicle on a mobile device.
Yeah.
It is a bear. That one, I wish I could say this is the final version. It's better than my previous ones, but like you use a joystick, it's too sensitive. You use these buttons, it's too archaic.
Yeah.
Ooh, it's
Yeah.
definitely been one of my biggest redesigns.
It's always a challenge. I feel like for me, whenever there's those big problems, don't be afraid to just like look at other games on the platform or elsewhere on mobile or
Yeah,
something, right? Because chances
I
are
think
somebody else is like banging their head against the wall long enough to maybe get you 90% of the way there. But
I
yeah, I
mean,
can
I'll admit that's
empathize
how I
there.
came to this one, was looking at other games currently on Roblox and
Yeah,
going,
yeah,
okay, we'll see if their way works.
yeah.
It's better than mine.
Vehicle controls are definitely a struggle. I
Yeah.
can agree on that.
I feel like vehicles in general on Roblox, just talking to developers is a struggle. Cindering, do you have an example as well? Like maybe one, that you've released and just constantly iterated over time?
Yeah, so our house editor is the biggest example of that.
Mm.
So like this is a feature that's always been in our games and constantly been iterating on it. So yeah, version 1, which is from the original Roblox High School back in 2014. It's very, very bare bones, very, that's 2014 Roblox for you.
Mhm.
Um, and then in 2018, we have version 2, which we released with Roblox High School 2. And we made improvements to that, simplified, the UI, made some design improvements. But now version 3 is our current version, which released in 2021, and definitely really happy with how the current version has turned out. It's a lot cleaner, a lot more visually appealing. Highlighting the important elements in the house editor and making it easy to use on all platforms. And even then, still constantly iterating on it, seeing what we can do better. So it's always an ongoing process.
Well, I was going to say at this pace in 2026, you're going to hate this current layout and you're going to overhaul it again.
Yeah.
No, I think one of the most interesting things about your redesign here is, in version 2, you can see, obviously you simplified it a lot and it looks very usable. But the really big addition that I see here in this current version is this pop of color differentiation between these different things, right? Color, size, all of those things, right? So it really helps navigate the player's eyes to certain things that you want them to focus on.
Yeah, highlighting the shop button, adding furniture in the bottom corner, making those the biggest buttons. Make sure they see that first. Yeah, definitely important.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to the 2026 version.
Maybe
it's like VR or something.
A little asterisk I want to put on that is what Cinderings has done really well here is make the color mean something. Whereas what I see a lot of games sometimes, and I've been guilty of it too, is think of color, and that'll do the exact opposite. That'll confuse people.
Yeah. If you're putting a rainbow of buttons, then it kind of all blends together anyway, and it's just noise on the screen, right?
I have been guilty of that. Yeah.
Same here. In fact, they've got an example in here of that.
All right. Well, Cindering, I had another question for you, which is, some players are solely focused on developing on PC, some are solely focused on mobile, and then the majority are trying to focus on both. But, when you're trying to focus on both, you kind of have to pick one versus the other in terms of what is like your main priority or your main focus, and then adapt to the other, right? So why would a developer want to be primarily mobile first focused in developing, their game or their UI?
Because basically mobile, that is the lowest spec. So if you make your game work on mobile, you can make it work on anything else. So that's the main reason to develop for mobile first as opposed to PC first. Because it's a lot easier.
Start with a hard one first and then, translate it over to the easier one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it screens for phones are just so small. Is it actually possible to design a UI for mobile that you could just copy and paste on PC?
Yeah. Like Nathan said, generally you want to make your UIs, as universal as possible. Obviously, if you have a lot of stuff that you need to translate from PC to mobile, then you may need to make slight alterations. Like, for example, our sidebar has a lot of information on it. So if you scaled that down to a mobile screen, it wouldn't translate very well. So on mobile, instead of having it all here, we have a little pop-out sidebar. So that's one example of something where you might need to make slight alterations. But overall, you definitely want to focus on having one UI whenever possible, because that'll make your life so much easier. Like doing this was a bit of a challenge. Like it's a bit of a challenge maintaining two UIs. So life is much easier if you do one scale UI.
Yeah. The biggest tip sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, just a quick addition, is the biggest tip I've found, as I mentioned, is move as much stuff as you can into the physical world. Like most shops, almost everything that isn't instantly important can be moved into the physical world. And that, for most games, obviously it's not universal. It actually even improves the user's experience of interacting with those items. It gives them a better sense of what it's for and why it's important.
Yeah, as long as it's discoverable. Because I've seen some developers put it in the physical world and I'm like, well, good luck in finding the weapon shop. And then players are running into battle like ill-equipped because they don't know where it is. But
it's always a tough balance.
Yeah.
In our game in particular, we have tons of features and a big map. So it can be a big challenge figuring out how to surface all of that correctly. And I definitely think that one thing we need to improve on is like scaling down the UI, not showing as much there. It's always an ongoing challenge. You're always trying to figure out the solutions.
Yeah, I feel like every time I pop into some of my favorite Roblox games, like, 3 months, 6 months out, there's always some change or tinkering with the UI. Their UI artists are just sitting there daily, just staring at it like, thing bothers me, but what am I going to do about it? So just know out there, if you've struggled with UI in the past, that's a universal thing in game development, something to struggle
And
with.
experiment with it. Like, the only reason ours are any good is because we've tried a dozen different things for it, and players will tell you if they hate it.
Yeah. And one common thread I just wanted to tie together on what you were talking about, Cindering, but Nathan, you had mentioned it as well, is like the difficulty in trying to maintain two separate UIs, right? Do you, anecdotally, Nathan, do you have like a story to tell of like, one of your games specifically where you're like, I'm going to do only PC and only mobile. And at some point in live ops, you're like, this is a nightmare to maintain.
Yeah. I started with War Simulator, my biggest game. We still have, for our older UIs, different versions for PC and mobile. And like, it works. It technically is doable, but it's just so much harder to maintain when you can just make a UI that scales automatically. As soon as I learned how to do that, I never went back. I'm like, there's no good reason. It's only pain. It's only suffering.
It's only pain.
I
like
agree.
the tagline for UI UX.
It's not the
design.
end of the
It's only
world,
pain.
like most things game development.
Yeah.
Better and best. You don't have to do it perfect. If you want to design different, you can, but you will be making your life harder.
That's right. That's right. Well, Cindering, one more question for you on, just the stuff that you showcased there, but like, what are some of the key considerations for like a mobile UI layout?
So like we mentioned earlier, button layout important, like Nathan's map of where you should put the buttons. Always put the most important stuff in the hot zones, like on the right side of the screen where the player has an easy time pressing it. That's one key consideration. And of course, like only showing the most important information on the screen that they need to know at that moment. So you're making the most of the little screen size that you have.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And, I just wanted to bring up from my experience working with a lot of developers, one common mistake that I see is sometimes they'll put a bunch of buttons on the left side of the screen, but you have to remember that's your movement button. So anytime they go to push a button on that side of the screen, their character is not moving anymore, right?
Yeah.
That might be okay for some games, but like if you're in a first-person shooter and you stop moving, right, you're just open target.
An incredibly minor mistake I've made is the upper half. I often, when I go into test mode, think, hey, this is all free. But what you don't realize is in a live game, there will be a large chat feed that goes right over top of this.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So you don't have that much space to work with. Like really the right side is like all you've got. So it's important to consider.
Yeah. Well, on that topic, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say, but that's a good thing because it limits you into knowing that you need to conserve your space. Because you are saying when you make these things, hey, this is so important to you, player, that I am permanently putting it on your screen. So being limited in how much you can do is actually kind of helpful, in my opinion, when I design stuff going, is this really important enough? Kind of forces me to weed out what's not.
Yep. It really is a universal truth of all game design, not just UI, UX, but like constraints make our design better, right? And in this case, having that limited space makes you really think about what is the information that you actually need to show your player there, right? Yeah. Well, that's a good transition to my next question for you, Nathan, which is like, how important is UI in terms of surfacing and discoverability for key mechanics?
Night and day different. I'd say the easiest metric I've found to monitor that is my various games and monetization. I mean, obviously monetization is a lot more complicated than just how it's communicated, but I've found that more than anything, obviously, plays a huge role in it. How easy it is for a player to find where to buy something in my game and how important I display that. It literally quadruples my monetization. This is an example of if you can see it. One of the areas where I did this poorly. There's too much on this screen here. And coincidentally, this game, in return, has literally a quarter the monetization of, say, one of my other games like War Simulator, but it's only 2 buttons on the screen, period, one of them being the shop. And another example is in this UI. I don't know if you can see it because of the chat locations, but some can see a purple home button. Now, to you and me, that's obvious, especially me who made it. But to the players, less than 10% of players have ever seen or clicked on that purple home button. Like, there's not even a lot here, and it's still too much. So it makes just a huge world of difference. It is the night and day difference of them knowing a feature exists or doesn't, period. It's more important.
Yep. I know from my own experience, we've spent entire sprints, a month, just overhauling and working on, shop UIs or buttons on the screen, and even just changing the art or the color or the position or how many buttons there are can weirdly lift your metrics like monetization, because a player actually discovers it and is like, oh, what is that? Let me click on it. Oh, this is interesting. I want to buy it, right?
Yeah.
But if they never see that in the first place, they never have the opportunity to consider whether or not they actually want that thing. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Does designing for mobile influence, how you use your or present your text? And Nathan, for you.
So my philosophy on text is don't have it anywhere possible, for so many reasons, but one, for scaling, but two, you really underestimate how many non-native English speakers are playing your game, or at least I do. Maybe you don't, but I certainly do. It's safe to say less than half your players know how to speak English fluently, so use icons if you can. Where you do need text, tiny amounts. I mean, you, Dan, were the one who taught me caveman speak. If you use speak at all, I've gone further and removed vocabulary from the game, but yes.
Yeah, we were talking about before the show, the three of us, how the journey over time we've learned how little players actually read, that you put on the screen.
They don't. I don't even read. If I'm looking at a tutorial on a game, first 2 words each sentence, maybe.
Yeah, I'm just like blasting through the text boxes so I can get to the actual experience itself.
Yep.
True. Yep. And kind of going off of that point too, localization. You also have to consider if you put text on your screen and, it may be translated to different languages, the text may be longer in those languages. So you have to remember to accommodate and have enough space for all that text, because, maybe your English text looks fine on mobile, but then in a different language, it's extended a lot and then it's like really small and illegible. So you always have to think about that as well.
Yeah, we're specifically talking about the German language. Shout out to all UI designers out there who have cried trying to fit it into a text box. Well, I wanted to shift over to UX design. Very often when you hear about either of these, they're paired together, but they really are 2 separate things, right? UI is the physical buttons and interface that you see on the screen, and UX is the user experience, so the ability for the user to actually use the things that are on your screen, right? So Cindering, my first question for you on UX design is, what can a mobile developer do to reduce the friction and make their UX mobile friendly? I guess first, can you define friction? I know we throw out this term a lot here on the Level Up show, but briefly define it and then hop into that.
Yeah, friction's basically how hard it is to accomplish what you're trying to do. Like, can you find this button? Can you find this feature? If you're having to spend a lot of time searching for it, then you're creating a lot of friction, and then players might drop out. They might stop searching for that. So important to keep it simple.
So then our next step is, how do we reduce that friction as a mobile developer or mobile first developer?
Yeah, so I think like Nathan was talking about, reduce the amount of info on the screen and highlight the most important buttons. Highlight what you want your player to click on, and then make the pathways very clear. Don't, if you have a UI, have only the minimum number of buttons that you need that the player would that would be relevant to the player so that they can easily make their way through the UI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and less windows is more.
Yes.
So in terms of like UX, general UX principles, like what are some of UX principles and how important are they?
Yeah, so you want to be consistent with your design. For example, if you have buttons, you generally want them to have the same appearance. So whenever the player sees this, they know it's a button. Whenever the player sees this, they know it's something else. So you want to have consistent design language, so it's very easy to understand at a glance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't want them clicking into one menu and it's one UI or one convention, and then in the other, you completely flip the script and you have to interface with it in a completely different way.
Yeah, because that forces the player to think more and it increases friction.
Yeah. Well, here is another game design buzzword, moment of joy. Nathan, can you talk a little bit about, some moments of joy that you've designed in your UX in the past?
I mean, there's the obvious ones about, when they level up in a game, give them a fancy sound effect or stuff like that, but everyone probably already knows to do that, reward them when they do something you want them to do. Yeah. But one part of that I never thought about that I found surprisingly effective is, reward them when they do something you want to do. I want them to give me money. So when they buy something, I have found it's actually surprisingly profitable and feel good for the player to give them some kind of visual and audio reward for doing that, which not a lot of people do. For example, in one of my games, if you buy a bunch of coins, you'll get a bunch of coins raining down on your screen with some, very rewarding sound effects. And that surprisingly changes quite a bit. I highly recommend it.
A little dopamine release when they see all those.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the opposite is true too. You don't want them to make a purchase and then be like, did I actually get the thing? Did they steal my money? Did I just get scammed?
That is actually a very good point. Yes. I've done that before.
We've definitely gotten those complaints in the past. Like, no. It's in your inventory. You got to scroll over here. And then you turn around to your UI artist. You're like, we got to fix that. Yeah. Well, I guess on that point then, and, I'll toss this up in the air for either of you to answer. Like, how do you ensure that your UX is mobile and player friendly? Like, what are some of the tips and tricks?
I don't know how
Nathan, you talked about some of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I personally try to find someone in the real world who doesn't know how to play mobile games and then have them play it and then watch them and go, okay, where don't you know how to do what you're doing? Like, without saying anything, without telling them what to do, just going, where are you stuck? In my case, it's usually either my mother or someone else I can find in reality who just isn't very familiar with mobile games, and that makes a world of difference because you'd never really know where they get stuck. And just watching them do it, you find someone in your life who hasn't played it, and it'll make a world of difference in your design.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's super useful. Like whether you can find someone in real life or, you watch, if it's after release, you can even watch videos of your game and, see how people interact with it through that. And that's a really good window into how a new player sees your game and what you can improve.
Yeah. And Nathan, you talked a little bit about it before, but it sounds like you had some analytics in terms of understanding how many people actually clicked on a button on your screen too, right?
Yeah. So analytics is an ever-evolving thing that we're trying to work on. It's always one thing you want to do more, but never do quite enough of. Mostly, the easiest way I've found currently is using badges. So like for the example, that home one, I know only 10% of players have clicked on it because I tied a badge to clicking on it, which makes kind of the hackiest possible, most Robloxy type analytics you can think of, but
of course,
it works. So I recommend it. Both players love badges and the hackiest analytics possible, but easy. You'll actually do them.
Well, the common thread there, it seems, is just seeing what your players are doing, whether it's through numbers or through visuals, and reacting to it and trying to make adjustments for it, right?
Yeah. Like I said before, it's good, better, and best. If you do it, then you're doing better than everyone else. If you do it poorly, you're still doing it. If you can improve on it later, still good,
Yeah.
I mean, some of the games on Roblox that are most successful have some of the most god-awful user interface I have ever seen. But they made a fun game, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yep, and it's only upside when you make those changes.
It can only improve your everything.
If you start at god awful, as you were demonstrating with the monetization portion, like you can
exactly. I still had successful games when it was terrible, but I now have even more.
All right. Well, thanks for taking the time to talk to me about all of these questions that I had. Aaron, I believe we're going to toss it over to you, and we have some questions from the audience.
Yes, we do have a lot of questions. This is great. Okay, starting with question number 1. What is the most underutilized feature, for example, touch swipe, get device gravity, etc., that you would recommend for mobile devices?
I think Cindering probably has a more technical answer for this, but I'd say the one, and it's why we chose to put it in this talk at all, is aspect ratio constraints. Just constraints in general. I was really surprised how few developers, when I spoke to them, knew how to use them, and they're just amazing. Like, learn how to use those if you don't know how. They make, your life will be so much better.
Yeah, I wanted to give a quick intro on like all that stuff, but like it's definitely worth deep diving into all of that and learning how the constraints work, because they really do make your life so much easier. And yeah,
they do some cool things too.
Yeah, there's a lot that I didn't even know about, so you always learn something new.
And there are so many devices with different aspect ratios. Respect to play and landscape orientation, what are any reasons you can think of for portrait orientation on mobile?
To see if anyone even maintained for that. And surprisingly many do. None could tell me it was a good idea, but some do. I could only ever find one person who told me that the reason they did prepare their device for aspect ratio for not landscape is for TikTok and recording on TikTok, because TikTok is in not portrait and makes players recording on their device easier, and for that monetization. And that's smart. My personal opinion, it's not completely worth it. Certainly not for if you're developing a new game. If you've got time after you've already got a successful game, why not? But I wouldn't worry about it personally, though Cinderings might disagree.
I agree. I think portrait mode really works best for very simple games. Like, I know Natural Disaster Survival has it because it's very simple. You just move around, avoid things. There's not complex controls or anything. But if you have any large amount of UI, that's going to be so difficult to translate to portrait mode. So I don't bother supporting it.
Yeah, and it's an established convention that you're going to play it in landscape mode anyways. If you're playing on Roblox on a phone, like every other game is landscape. I have never once in almost a decade had a player complain about not having built-in support for it. So you won't be missing anything.
I see. I did work on a mobile game that was portrait oriented, but it was because specifically it was a location-based game that required you to walk around the world, and we really wanted you to go play it one-handed. But yeah, not really a thing on Roblox right now, but that was the only thing I could think of too. So
yeah.
Cool. Okay. On PC, you can add tooltips to buttons to give players a hint about what the button does before they click it. Is there anything that developers can do on mobile to help players anticipate a button's function?
So in an ideal world, I'd say you shouldn't ever need to do that. You should ideally seek to figure out how to communicate to them what something does without ever having to have a tip for it. But maybe Cinderings, you have an answer for actually solving the question they asked.
Yeah, I'd say just use a very clear icon, very clear text, since obviously you can't rely on them hovering over it. So have the information up front right there so they know at a glance what it will do.
I think you can also do maybe a long press to bring up that tooltip, but that's such a hidden feature. I think most players don't expect to like long press on a button. So I'm not sure how much that really gets you, but
I mean, a partial example is, for example, in that crafting UI I made, I needed to not display every item's recipe directly on the screen at once. So I had it, they tapped on it, then the recipe came up, then they could click craft. It adds a little bit more of friction between them getting to do what they want and doing it, but maybe it's worth it for your use case.
Yeah, and in my case, we have items, and you can hover over them to show additional details. So we do have it in that case where you can long press on the object to see those details. Depends how critical the info is, but because you can't assume that the player will know how to do that, so you would only want to display like non-critical info there.
got it. Have either of you ever used like little eye or question mark buttons for more info on your features?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, again, in an ideal world, you are already communicating the information somewhere else, but yes, in particularly for like monetization items, I usually do that. Like, what's this Game Pass do? Well, press the button and it'll tell you.
Awesome. In your Roblox experience, is it important to take the style of the UI that combines within your experience while making it functional as well?
Surprisingly, no. I have never found that players actually care if your style of UI. In fact, I found that a too stylized UI will often confuse a player if it's like just so creatively done that they don't know what's going on. It's counterintuitive. I wouldn't have thought that, but it being understandable is far more important than it being stylized or pretty.
Yeah, because you'll look at like a lot of the top games on Roblox, you know, they all have very, very simplistic UIs. They're not very stylized, but they're functional. They work well, and it's easy to tell what's going on. There's no confusion.
Yep. And there are happy mediums. I mean, like Adopt Me is probably a masterclass in cute, adorable UI that's also super readable, but no, weirdly enough.
Yeah, I do get the impulse to make it really super thematic and maybe ornate and fit in with the rest of the screen and everything. But yeah, I totally agree with you that like if it has to communicate. That's the most important priority. So,
Yeah.
So we often work on PC or mobile, but how would you go about making UI more functional for controller support?
Very good question. I've suffered with that long and hard.
Yeah.
Short of it is universal UI. It should work for all UI. But Cindering, what are you going to say?
Yeah, I've had a lot of experience like designing for controllers and console. I would say in particular, like designing for console specifically, like the same kind of principles apply for mobile where you want it to be legible because on a console, the player is going to be sitting further back. So you have to be considerate of that as well. And in terms of button layout, you want to make sure it's organized in sort of a grid style so it's easy to navigate with the controller cursor. Because if everything's positioned weirdly, then they're going to have a hard time navigating it. But if you have a weird layout, there is also the virtual cursor that I believe Roblox came out with recently for gamepad. So that's also an option.
Yeah, great point.
Incredibly minor technical detail to that. Just make sure your UI buttons have the selectable property enabled. If you're just not showing up on console, that's why. Most
very important.
That was my first hard lesson, is figuring that out.
Why testing's important. All right. Is it good to have a UI grid layout and UI list alongside scroll frame in your game's interfaces?
Yeah, so if you have a grid layout, then it makes it, it automatically does the grid for you, and then you would want to use some code to like automatically scale the scrolling frame based on how big the contents of the grid are. But they are a perfect combo because you can make dynamically sized grids and it'll just auto scale based on what the contents are. So it's extremely useful.
Yeah, I second that. Every grid in my game is a scroll frame combined with a grid layout, period. Life is 1,000 times easier.
Great tips. Okay, here's a tricky one. Is it good to completely leave out more complex UI-based features of a game, or do I need to include all PC features on mobile, just hidden away behind several menu button clicks? For example, chat channels, extra car controls.
So there's no reason not to usually always include them. The only thing I've ever cut from a game is movement controls that might be applicable on PC and Xbox, but not on mobile. For example, in my game War Sim, you can slide while sprinting on PC, but we don't have that on mobile because it doesn't really apply. Every other feature, yeah, you might as well just lock it behind several menus if you must. If you've already done the effort to build a feature, there's no reason not to at least have it somewhere, even if not everyone's going to interact with it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, mobile players, I think often if you cut a feature from mobile, they may ask, well, why can't I do this on mobile? Where's this? So I think it's good to just have that available in some form.
You've already done all the work. Yeah.
Makes sense? Okay, do you play test your games on multiple different devices? How do you get feedback on your mobile UI UX?
Yes,
Yeah.
I have old phones that I try for performance, make sure it runs well. Xbox controllers, stuff like that. Everything we can get our hands on, we do.
Yeah, always play test on. And if you don't have devices, you can use the device emulator. It works great for all sorts of things. Lots of testing.
Yeah. Otherwise, like I said with Dan, we find someone who doesn't know how to play our game and we watch them play it is probably the best way to learn if what you've done works or not, either virtually or ideally in real life, but either works.
Right, in real life, you can see their expression.
It's a lot easier.
We see where they're tapping. Yeah, makes sense.
See what they're looking at when they're confused, and that tells you a lot. Like, where do you think you're supposed to be going right now that makes you so confused? Why have I made it not that?
Yeah, I think we could do one of these events just on playtesting as well.
Super helpful.
Fair. Yeah.
All right. Are there any features that Roblox could add that would make developing for mobile UI easier? Do you have a wish list?
I know a lot of devs who do, but none that I personally know of. Kind of one of those things where you don't know about it if you have never used it. I've never really developed mobile on a different platform, so I don't know what we might be missing, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know of UI specific stuff. I'm not sure mobile in particular. I've always wanted more control over the alpha cutouts, being able to do that with UI. That would be cool. It's always something I've wanted.
As a general rule, the tools Roblox has for UI right now are actually pretty well developed and fleshed out. There's very little for your average game that you're going to want to do that you can't do pretty efficiently. They've done that actually pretty well. I mean, there's things highly technical that, I'm sure some of the better developers out there will crucify me for saying, but for most practical applications, they've done well.
Yeah, because back in the day, back when I was making the original Roblox High School, there were no constraints pretty much. You had to script everything yourself.
Scaling back then.
Yeah. I just used offset for everything, and I had to make these really tiny UIs just to make sure they fit on mobile. But
yeah.
It was tough. Now it's so much easier now with all these tools.
Great. Glad to hear that. Okay. What workarounds do you use for the limited resolution or screen size that mobile devices have? how do you work with it without covering the whole screen and options and buttons and causing screen clutter?
So that design layout I showed before is what I stick to. That is my golden rule. If it fits in that, it fits on mobile. Anything else goes in the physical world. I'm going to say that again.
Yeah, and like I said before, like setting the size properly so that it scales appropriately for all screens, and then just toggling the device emulator, see if it fits on the screen, and just doing that with every UI you create.
An easy comparison is leaderboards for me. They don't really fit on the screen because there's too much information. So I stuck them on a panel in the actual physical world, and way more players can scale to their heart's content using their camera.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, fabulous answers. Thank you. That is our last question. Right on time for once. Awesome. Thank y'all. So that is all the time that we have. Thank you to Nathan and Cindering for sharing your expertise with us, and Dan as well. And thank all of you for joining us today. For everyone who is watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Roblox Level Up YouTube channel. We will have more game development videos coming soon. And if you'd like to join in on the conversation and network with other developers, join our Guilded server. We would love to see you there. For our attendees, we are going to get the after party started over on Guilded now. So we'll see you there.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hopefully something made sense.
Y'all did great.
All right. See you all over at Guilded.